Miss Nobody from Nowhere by Elizabeth Ashton. Chapter 6. When Angela saw Abbotswood, she wondered how Clive could be reluctant to return to it, could have borne to tear himself away from it. It was a possession of which many man would be proud, and it had sheltered generations of Strattons. The house was situated in a valley above a winding stream, between the steep pointed hills that lie to the north of Sherborne. For those who had the energy to climb the saddle between the two peaks behind it was the reward of a magnificent view over Somerset to the Severn estuary, the greens, browns and reds of the farmland melting into a horizon of tender blue and mauve, with none of the harsh, stark outlines that had characterized the mountains round Kabul. The interior was gracious, with high-ceilinged airy rooms and big windows, the furniture old and solid with a profusion of polished wood. It was a house that had been loved and cared for, and breathed an atmosphere of home. Angela and Clive travelled down from London by rail and were met at Sherborne station by Ralph Stratton, some 11 or so years younger than his half-brother. He was lean, dark and vivacious. A butterfly where girls were concerned, he had not yet formed a serious attachment. He was standing on the platform as their train came in, and as soon as Clive alighted from their compartment, he bore down upon him with a whoop of glee, slapping him on the shoulder. "Welcome home, wanderer," he exclaimed dramatically. "And I hope you come to stay. Ma can't manage without one of us, and it's my turn to spread my wings." "That's so," Clive inquired without enthusiasm. "We'll go into all that later." He looked disparagingly at Ralph's costume, very full trousers in 2 colours, a flamboyant shirt and a fringed suede jacket. "Aren't you getting a little old for fancy dress?" "It's never too old to be with it," Ralph returned, "and we've grown out of that Pukka Sahib stuff while you've been away." Clive turned to Angela, who was watching this exchange with amusement. "Angela, this ruffian is my young brother, Ralph. Meet your new sister-in-law." Ralph struck an attitude of rapt appraisal. "Gorgeous," he pronounced. "You know how to pick 'em, Clive. Where did you find her? Your cable got us all guessing. She looks as though she came out of a Persian garden. But you're not a native, are you, love?" "Certainly not," she told him, laughing. "I'm as English as you are." Clive went on to collect their luggage, leaving the 2 younger people staring at each other. Ralph was very unlike Clive, except for his clear grey eyes, which contrasted with his dark hair, but he was only his half-brother. Actually, he had arrived when his parents had all but despaired of having any more children, and one of their own. "I don't know whether that's a relief or a disappointment," Ralph told her. I was half hoping to meet an Afghan houri or a Chinese geisha. Sorry, my mistake. Geishas are Japanese. But it's better for the succession that you're English. The village might jib at a foreign squiress." Angela blushed. She had not discussed the possibility of a family with Clive. She had no idea how he regarded it. Now it occurred to her that he might want a son to inherit Abbotswood, and, cheering thought, that might keep him at home. "But you still haven't said where he found you," Ralph rattled on, eyeing the outfit Clive had brought for her on their way through London. It was very simple, a plain blue dress and jacket, but it was beautifully cut. "You look more like Paris than Kabul." Clive arrived with a porter in time to overhear his question. "Her father was on a dig in Persia," he said casually, a true but misleading explanation. "And when I first met her, she didn't look like she does now." He grinned at the recollection. "This is my handiwork." He touched his wife's shoulder possessively. "You've made a good job of her," Ralph conceded, "though you couldn't have done it if she hadn't given you a good start. Let's get going. Poor Ma is expecting something out of the Arabian Nights." He smiled wickedly. "So we must hurry up and put her out of her suspense. You're a bit unpredictable, big brother. She was staggered when you cabled that you were bringing home a wife." Clive shot him a keen look. "Why not?" he asked ironically. "Exactly, why not? She can't expect you to remain the bereaved widower forever. I'm all for it." He glanced again at Angela. "It'll be fun to have someone young about the place, and you look very young. What did you say your name was?" "Angela," she said firmly. "Angelic Angela. How apt." He looked speculatively at his half-brother. "But I didn't expect you'd descend to cradle snatching, Clive." "I'm 21, Angela said stiffly, "and I prefer mature men. Clive is in the prime of his life." "Oh, quite. No doubt I spoke out of turn." You did, Clive told him repressively. But you know what Ma'll say, the irrepressible one went on gaily as they reached the car. I hope she won't be so tactless, Clive said sharply. I dare say she'll only think it, Ralph observed airily. What? Angela demanded. Never mind, Clive bade her, and busied himself storing their luggage in the boot. Ralph opened the passenger door for Angela, and she murmured as she stepped inside. What will your mother think? You'd better tell me. With half an eye on Clive, Ralph whispered, There's no fool like an old fool. Oh, Angela subsided onto the seat. But he isn't old, Ralph. No, only old enough to know better, according to Mum, but I applaud his taste. Don't worry, Angela, I'll stand by you. I'm not worrying, she insisted bravely, but she quailed at the thought of meeting Mrs. Stratton. Clive came to claim the driver's seat, and Ralph got into the back. Thus do I relinquish the reins of government, he announced. You can drive if you want to, Clive told him ungraciously. No, it's your privilege, your car, and your house. I was only the deputy. Maybe I'll be asking you to deputise again, Clive remarked as they drove out into the country without passing through the town. Oh, no, you won't. Not now you've got a wife. You're going to become the lord of the manor and rear progeny to carry on the name of Stratton. I'm going to London to make my fortune. Angela stole a look at Clive to see how he accepted this programme. She could only see his profile, and his eyes were intent upon the road, but she noticed his jaw was set, and sensed that Ralph's remarks had not pleased him. His brother had obviously got his own plans, which did not include continuing as a stand-in for Clive. Would that preclude his half-formed plans to go to Bolivia? Desperately she hoped it would. The green of the trees and grass was refreshing after the barren heights of Afghanistan. Hawthorn bloomed in the hedgerows and lilac in the cottage gardens. She looked at the low emerald slopes of the hills as they entered the valley leading up to Abbotswood. She had never realised before what a beautiful and restful colour green was. The English countryside looked small, enclosed and safe after the savage grandeur of the landscapes she had been among for so long. She was happy to see it again, but she supposed it was too tame for Clive's adventurous spirit. Mrs. Stratton came to the door to meet them as the car drew up before the stone porch with its 2 pillars on either side and 3 steps leading up to the front door of Abbotswood. She was a tall, dark, handsome woman with hair so intensely black Angela suspected it was tinted to conceal the encroaching grey. Ralph bore some resemblance to her, Clive none at all. But Clive was not her son. He embraced her fondly, then stepped back to present his wife. This is Angela, mother. Angela saw then with surprise that Mrs. Stratton's eyes were blue, contrasting with her dark colouring, and they were hard as stones. She stared critically at the girl, and Angela raised her own dark head defiantly. She knew in those first few moments of meeting that she was confronting an enemy. Celia Stratton resented Clive's second wife, and there was open hostility in her gaze. "Come in, dear," she said, but with no warmth in her voice. "Tea is ready, or would you like to go to your room first?" "I would like a wash," Angela admitted. "Railway trains are so grimy." "Come upstairs, then. The boys will bring in the baggage." Angela realised that though both men were grown, they would always be the boys to Celia. She followed her up the broad carpeted stairs, along a passage and into a big bedroom. It was furnished with a double bed, a large wardrobe and a triple-mirrored dressing table. A door connected it with a dressing room containing another bed. "I hope you'll be comfortable," Celia Stratton said conventionally. "The bathroom is next door with your towels. We have 2. Ralph and I will use the other one." Then she seemed to recollect something. "But of course you'll be mistress here now, and can make any changes that you wish." I wouldn't want to displace you," Angela stammered awkwardly. "It'll take me some time, a long time to, get used to everything." "Perhaps you've never lived in a country house?" "No. We had a flat in London." "Very different. No space. We've plenty of that here, and naturally the housekeeping is very much more difficult. No running out to the supermarket whenever something's been forgotten." Angela wondered with dismay if Clive would expect her to tackle it, but not while his mother was still in the house. For the first time she was glad of Celia's presence. Clive came in carrying their suitcases. He glanced round the room and then at Celia. "We don't want to turn you out, Mother," he told her. "The guest room would have done for us. The master and The master and mistress should occupy the master bedroom, she returned emphatically. I'm only the dowager now. I'll be quite happy in Jassie's old room. But Clive looked worried. I prefer it, she interrupted him. There I can be with my cherished memories. I've had her portrait moved in there. Clive gave an exclamation of annoyance, and his stepmother's look was full of reproach. We haven't all forgotten Jasmine, she said sadly. She turned to Angela. Wives can be replaced, but daughters can't. I suppose you know Clive married my girl by my former marriage. It made us such a unified family, for of course poor Jassie wasn't a Stratton until Clive made her one. She sighed. I've never ceased to grieve for her, and no one can ever take her place. She gave Clive a meaning glance, as if to imply that if he thought he had found a substitute, she would prove inadequate. Then she went out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Angela was stunned by this disclosure. She cast back in her mind to the occasion upon which Clive had described his family to her. He had mentioned that his father had married a widow with a baby daughter, but he had not said what had become of the child, nor had she noticed the omission. Had it been deliberate? And if so, why? I'm sorry about that, Clive said abruptly. You'd think that after 9 years you'd let it rest. He passed his hand wearily over his forehead, pushing up his fair forelock. You didn't tell me you'd married your stepmother's granddaughter. Angela, said reproachfully, realizing that Clive and Jasmine must have been brought up together, and by marriage she had gained his name, which was the only difference between her and Clive's father's children. A united family there had been in all truth. She felt terribly conscious of being an usurper in their compact circle. Didn't I? But I'm sure I told you Celia had an infant before she married Dad. Yes, but you didn't mention that she grew up and became your wife. Does that make any difference? It does, because it accounts for Mrs. Stratton's antagonism. You might have warned me. Why? What could you have done? She thought about it. He was right. Pre-knowledge would not have changed anything, only increased her apprehensions. Clive was pacing up and down the room with impatient strides. It's morbid, he burst out. She makes a fetish out of her memories. Jassie's room, and that damned daub to stare at every night. He stopped and gave Angela a quizzical look. It's a horrible painting, and I wanted to burn it, but she wouldn't let me. Of course you'd want to keep it, Angela exclaimed, even if it isn't very good. You haven't seen it, he returned with an enigmatical smile. But you will. She'll insist upon showing it to you. But it's not the sort of memento a man would want to keep of his wife. He resumed his restless perambulations. It's unhealthy, this brooding over the past. Why can't she put it behind her? It isn't as if Jassie had been her only child. She's got Ralph. Angela walked to the window and looked out. The house was situated a little way up a hillside, so that the garden sloped to the brook that meandered along the valley floor. The beds were bright with spring flowers surrounding a terraced lawn enclosed by a red brick wall. Beyond was a shrubbery, a mass of flowering trees, lilacs, rhododendrons and laburnum. It looked too fair a place to be haunted by past sorrows. Clive's attitude was typically masculine, she thought. He wanted to bury his grief, but Celia, being a woman, cherished her memories. She said, she may have cared deeply for her first husband, and her girl was all she had left of him. Then she lost her too. It was cruel luck, Clive. Jasmine needn't have died, Clive declared vehemently. It was her own folly. Angela turned round to look at him. He had sat down upon one of the beds, his head in his hands, and his face was set in bitter lines. You mean it was an accident? She faltered. He gave her a wary glance. Sort of, he said. He stared at her inimically, almost as if she had been in some way responsible for Jasmine's death. Don't look at me like that, she cried in distress. I haven't done anything. No, he said harshly. You haven't. She stared at him questioningly, and with an effort he brought himself back from his voyage among painful memories. His face cleared, and he smiled at her. This is no way to welcome you, he said apologetically. And it was all over and done with long ago. Poor mother broods too much about the past. Perhaps now I'm come home to take over, I can persuade her to go away. A world cruise might reorientate her. He stood up. I've been selfish. I've left her too much alone. She had Ralph. Just what I thought, but apparently he isn't enough. But I'm forgetting tea is waiting for us. Are you ready to go down?
No, I want to wash my hands. I won't be a minute.
Angela hurried into the bathroom. Celia presided over the silver teapot after ostentatiously offering that privilege to Angela, who hastily declined it. The sitting room was under Angela's bedroom and commanded the same view. French windows opened onto a terraced lawn surrounded by flower beds. A rockery connected with it with a rose garden, and below that was a shrubbery full of flowering bushes. Around the window, starred jasmine climbed the walls, and its scent permeated the room, a perpetual reminder of the girl who had borne that name. Angela sat in an easy chair facing the window. Ralph lounged in another one, except when he sprang up to pass sandwiches, cake and cups of tea. Clive sat beside his stepmother on the sofa, and they talked of what happened in the vicinity during his absence, and how the farm was progressing. Ralph watched them with amusement and threw occasional remarks to Angela. She was not responsive, for she was hurt by Clive's neglect. He seemed to be deliberately excluding her. Tea over, he went with Celia to look at some improvements in his domain, leaving Angela without excuse or apology. Ralph looked at her humorously. "Like to look over the estate?" he asked. "I'll take you, since Ma has monopolised Clive."
"Thanks very much, but I think I'll wait until he's free to show me round."
"Maybe you'll wait a long time," he told her, a little piqued by a rejection of his offer.
"I don't think so. Of course, Mrs. Stratton has a lot to tell him since he's been away so long," she said in Clive's defence.
Ralph's expression became commiserating. "You'll have to stick up for yourself," he warned her, "otherwise Ma'll continue to monopolise him."
"Oh, I shall,"
she declared, and meant it, but she would choose her time to assert herself.
"I'd better go and unpack. Do you dress for dinner?"
"We spruce ourselves up a bit, put on suits. Beastly bore, but Ma insists. She always changes her dress." Angela stowed her things in Clive's away in wardrobe and drawers with a feeling of impermanence. It did not seem possible that she was going to live in this beautiful house for months and years. She was more like an obligatory guest, and not a very welcome one at that. She had added to her clothes during their brief stop in London under Clive's directions. She had bought unwillingly, for she did not... Oh, God! Oh, sorry. I'm cold. I'm tired, and this book is boring, but also quite thrilling, isn't it? How are we doing? If anyone's actually stuck it out to get this far in the thing, I'm impressed. She had bought unwillingly, for she did not enjoy spending his money, but she realised he expected her to dress well to uphold his position. She wondered if her father had left anything. Even a pittance of her own would enhance her self-respect. She would make discreet inquiries once she was settled, if she ever were settled in this hostile atmosphere. She could not quite explain her reluctance to accept Clive's bounty. Excuse me. It was normal for a husband to pay for his wife's clothes. Unless she had her own money. It was partly because she was giving him so little in exchange. Even his desire for her seemed to have died. And he did not need her to run his house. His stepmother was doing that much more efficiently than she could. For dinner, she put on a demure crimpline dress with short sleeves and a square neckline. Celia appeared in black chiffon with diamonds on her fingers and in her ears. Angela wondered which husband had been the donor. The two men wore dark suits. The meal was simple, but excellently cooked and served. "I'm training a local girl," Celia announced, "but I know as soon as she's provisioned she'll go off to a town and leave me. They all do, though I pay a comparable wage. The lure of the bright lights," she shrugged her shoulders. "The sweet I prepared myself," she glanced at Angela. "Can you cook?" "Just plain dishes," Angela told her. She had been shown the kitchen, a vast apartment, with a granite floor and single hearth rug as was common in those days. The stove was a large Argo, which also heated the water. She could not imagine herself preparing food upon that expansive stove. She was used to a gas cooker. She told them so. "But I expect I can learn," she said hopefully.
No need, unless you're in a hurry. Oh, yes, no need, unless you're in a hurry to make changes. Celia gave her a barbed look. I'm not, but I think I should do something to justify my existence. Good Lord, how frightfully worthy, Ralph laughed. I wouldn't dream of doing anything if I could find someone to do it for me, except amuse myself, of course. That's what I want Angela to do, Clive interpolated. She's had rather a hard time. Celia looked at him interrogatively, but he did not elucidate. Just rest and lounge about, Angela, until you get, the feel of things. There's a swimming pool at the back of the house and a tennis court. And of course you ride. Angela knew he was referring to her expedition on muleback. She felt a wave of nostalgia for those happy, carefree days when she had been just a nameless waif. Elephants or camels? Ralph asked facetiously. My last mount was a mule, Angela told him. Good heavens, only 1 degree better than a jackass. It was the only beast that could keep its footing in the country we were traversing, Angela explained with one eye on Clive. Oh, on your dig, I suppose, Ralph suggested. Was Clive there, and did he ride a mule? He looked audaciously at his half-brother. I prefer to walk, Clive returned, refusing to be drawn. Celia said dreamily, Jasmine was a wonderful horsewoman. Nobody made any comment. She'd effectively closed the conversation. Later, on their way back to the sitting room, Angela found Ralph beside her. The bitchiness of women, he muttered. Ma hasn't mentioned Jessie for years. Now I suppose we'll have her dished up for breakfast, lunch and dinner, unless Clive can muzzle her. I hope so. I hope so, Angela said in dismay. If Celia were going to throw Jasmine up at her every opportunity, it would be more than she could bear. Ralph invited Clive to accompany him down to the pub, declaring that the local inn was the best place to catch up with the gossip of the neighbourhood, and there he could meet several of his old cronies. Clive agreed with alacrity. Don't wait up for me, he told Angela. You'll be tired after your journey. I'm not all tired, she flashed explosively. I'm not all tired, she flashed explosively, resenting this well-worn pretext to be rid of her. I'm pretty tough, as you should know. Can I come with you? Celia clicked her tongue. Ladies don't go to pubs. Perhaps they didn't in your day, Angela was feeling exasperated, but you'll find plenty of girls in them now. Another time, Clive interposed. The local's only a rude sort of hostelry, Angela. I'll run you out to somewhere more exciting another time. Angela reflected that no English inn could be ruder than the tea houses in Afghanistan, and she continued to look at Clive reproachfully. Celia said indulgently, Let him go, Angela. He's dying for a masculine binge. The best of men, you know, can grow tired of feminine society. Angela flushed at the implied rebuke. She had no wish to try to keep Clive on strings, but as it was her first night in a strange place, she thought he might have stayed with her. She made no further protest, and the half-brothers went off like truant schoolboys. Brides have such a lot to learn, Celia murmured with false sweetness. I think I'll go upstairs, Angela informed her, unable to endure further baiting. I haven't finished unpacking. She had to offer some excuse out of politeness. Just as you like, my dear, Celia cooed. I'll come up too. I'm a bit fagged. I had to get up very early this morning. Such a lot to do, you know, and Ralph's so lazy. Someone has to see that the men arrive on time at the farm, but of course Clive will take over now. They walked upstairs together. Celia's door came first, and as she opened it, she said, Come inside. There's something I'd like to show you. Somewhat reluctantly, Angela followed her inside. The room was not nearly as large as hers, and the window looked sideways along the valley. The furniture was modern in light wood, the bed a divan with a rich golden brocade throw over, an easy chair and a television set indicated that Celia also used it as a sitting room. A door into an inner closet was ajar, a space just big enough to make a dressing room. It contained a rug, a high chair, and a narrow polished table, its walls being painted severely in white. On the table was a silver bowl full of white roses, on either side of which was a 3-branch candlestick, similar to those used upon altars, and above the table was a picture, the subject to whom this shrine was dedicated. Celia switched on a concealed light in the top of the frame, and Angela did not need to be told whom it represented. She was seeing Clive's damned daub. It was crudely painted, the colours too garish, but the artist had caught the erotic essence of his model, which perhaps was what Clive did not like.
It was undoubtedly a beautiful face. The rich dark hair was loose, falling softly over bared, creamy shoulders. Eyes, blue like her mother's, stared insolently out at the beholder. The full, sensual mouth was curved in a little secret smile. The soft contours of cheeks and chin had a voluptuous warmth, belied by the hardness of the eyes. Lines from a poem once read long ago recurred to Angela. Cold eyelids that hide like a jewel, hard eyes that grow soft for an hour, the heavy white limbs and the cruel, red mouth like a venomous flower. It was, she remembered, by Swinburne, and she had been caught by the sensuous rhythm of the lines, and that was why they had stuck in her mind. Venomous flower was an apt description of those luscious lips, and this was the girl who had been Clive's wife.
"My daughter, Jasmine," Celia murmured beside her. "Lovely, wasn't she? A man who once possessed her would find every other woman insipid. Angela flinched, for Celia had put into words her own increasing fear that Clive found her inadequate. She studied Jasmine's pictured face avidly and felt an increasing repulsion. Beautiful, yes, but it was an evil beauty, without the slightest hint of spirituality. Lilith, perhaps, but never Eve. Lilith, who had no soul. But what man wanted spirituality? Women like Jasmine could arouse and feed the hottest fires of amorous desire. She turned away from the sapphire eyes of the portrait and the malicious gaze of the woman beside her. "Thank you for showing it to me," she said coldly. "I've got the message, but it's possible you may be wrong. Clive isn't entirely sensual." Not the man who had tended her with such loving care when she had been ill in both body and mind. Instinctively she knew that there was a fineness in Clive that could be repelled by Jasmine's blatant sexuality. Yet he had loved her, so perhaps the artist was at fault. He had shown only one aspect of his sitter. She did not know much about men. Arthur had been uncomplicated and not very demanding, rather conventional in fact. Perhaps that was what had been wrong. They had been unable to wake passion in each other. Her father had been austere and remote, bolstering up a shaky union with a complaining wife. What fire had once burned in him had sunk to ashes. There was fire in Clive, too, that the lovely Jasmine had once ignited. It was flared up once for herself, but now she had lost the power to turn him on. Celia's lips curled cynically. "You're very naive, aren't you, my girl? Clive's no Sir Galahad, but very human, and you, I fancy, must be frigid." Angela knew she was not that. Perhaps it would have been better for her if she were. "Good night, Mrs. Stratton," she said politely. "I gather that is all you wanted to show me." "Isn't it enough?" Angela looked straight into the malevolent eyes. "It's only a portrait," she pointed out, "and the subject has been dead 9 years. But I, Mrs. Stratton, am very much alive, and I shall fight to hold my own." "You've lost your battle before you've even begun it," Celia told her. "Clive tells me he's contemplating an expedition to Bolivia." Angela felt a constriction at her heart. He might have spared her that, but since he regarded this woman as his mother, she would receive all his confidences. "He hasn't gone yet," she said steadily. "He may change his mind. Good night, Mrs. Stratton." In her own room she felt lost and alone, her confidence ebbing. She longed desperately for Clive, but he did not come. She lay awake restless and miserable until dawn. Where was he, and what was he doing? He had declared that Jasmine's tragedy was over and done with. He had put years of roaming and far places between him and his loss, but he had never managed to forget her. Now he was home again, his memories were catching up with him, and so he was contemplating another expedition. Jasmine was dead, but her presence still haunted Abbotswood. Clive knew that, and that was why he wanted to flee from it. He had brought Angela back with him to help him exorcise that restless spirit, but it was useless. He could not escape its influence. A girl might be able to hold her own against another woman, but how could she contend with a glamorous ghost?